There's nothing worse than an overly bright mix with too much treble, sometimes referred to as high-end in a mix or master. By high-end, we're referring to both the high mids, which on the frequency spectrum are at around 2K to 6K, and the highs, which are from 6K to 20K. Taming high-end is a notoriously tricky endeavor. Even for those with significant experience, it's a region in the frequency spectrum that manages to get out of control quickly. Sibilant vocals, splashy drums, resonant synths, fizzy guitars. Too much top end and your mix will burn ears. Too little and it'll sound lifeless. So in this video, we'll talk about ways to identify and take care of an overly bright mix.
Visit girls' aquariums, then socially I bury them. Not that I'm cold.
Before consulting your arsenal of plugins to tame brightness in a mix, it's important to understand if you have a problem in the first place. For as excellent as your hearing might be, your room or your speakers could be hiding the reality of your mix from you. One way to verify high-end hype is through tonal balance control. Tonal balance control displays spectrum metering information for the track it's currently inserted on relative to a target curve. We develop these curves after analyzing thousands of beautifully balanced mixes. So throw it on the master bus of your track, choose a target that closely represents the genre you're mixing or mastering, play some audio during a particularly energetic section of the arrangement, and take a look at the meters, particularly the high mid and high sections.
So we reach to the sky for a piece of the pie. I just wanna take. Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm with this.
If you notice your lines running north of the typical bounds of energy for the high mid and high areas of your target, which is where you might want your mix to be, your mix might be overly bright. To identify exactly which instruments might be contributing to an overabundance of brightness, press Alt or Option and click to solo the spectrum and investigate. Thanks to interplugin communication, a protocol that allows our plugins to talk to each other, if you determine that the percussion track is contributing to the brightness, you can call up your ozone or neutron EQ that's on the track from tonal balance control in the drop-down menu and remove brightness without ever leaving tonal balance control. So because we have a neutron on the track, I can see the neutron from the drop-down menu here, call it up, and start low passing. We can do the same with a mastering move. So if ozone is on our 2 bus, we can call up its EQ here and make a broad stroke EQ move across the whole track to tame brightness. We all know that an SE vocal needs to be de-essed. This is the process of using a de-esser, like the one that we have in Nectar 3, to tame sibilance introduced by a naturally sibilant singer, or even sometimes inoffensive S's turn sour from a bright microphone. But sometimes group vocals need an extra dose of de-essing on the bus they're going through, even if you've de-essed them on their individual tracks. This means going to the group track you've funneled all your vocals through on their way to the master and using some kind of tool to de-ess them. As mentioned before, Nectar 3 contains a de-esser which can automatically detect and attenuate sibilance through Vocal Assistant. Let Nectar do the de-essing work for you by placing it on the group vocal bus, then head to Vocal Assistant, Assist, pick a style and intensity, then run it over some audio.
Came to see a wonderful place. You ain't gotta ask for it, it was made here for us. Eventually fade. Came to see a wonderful place. You ain't gotta ask for it, it was made here for us.
If you don't need the other modules, remove them and just keep the de-esser.
Came to see a wonderful place. You ain't gotta ask for it, it was made here for us. Smiles eventually fade, but came to see a wonderful place. You ain't gotta ask for it, it was made here for us. Smiles eventually fade, but I still remember the day.
Reverb can have a tendency to brighten an already bright song element. That's why in both Nectar 3 and Exponential Audio plugins, now a part of the iZotope family, You can use the filter to determine which part of the signal gets a serving of reverb. If you're Nectar, use the low-pass post filter to make sure high frequencies aren't accentuated with reverb.
Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep. Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep. Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep.
If you're using an exponential audio reverb plugin, do the same by adjusting the frequency input EQ.
So we reach to the sky for a piece of the pie. I just wanna taste. Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep. So we reach to the sky for a piece of the pie. I just wanna taste. Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep.
It's also a good idea to use filters on reverb aux tracks, not just on track inserts, where whole groups of vocals or instruments are being processed with reverb. Some mix elements are overly fizzy and bright, and a great way to soften them is with time-based effects like delay and reverb. Take this percussion track, for example. In solo or in the context of the mix, its high mids and highs are especially grating on the ear.
Cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep. Oh, keep floating on. Oh.
I could use an EQ to low pass the highs, but I like the feel of the percussion elements and I don't want to take away from that. So I'm going to use an advanced technique to separate the low-end elements from the high-end elements and tame the treble. First, I'll duplicate the track and label one low percussion and one high percussion. Now I'll place an instance of Neutron's EQ on both the original and the duplicate. Working from the high percussion track, I'm going to use the masking meter in Neutron. I'll divide the frequencies between the two tracks using a high-pass filter on the high percussion track. High-pass means we're allowing the highs to pass. And I'll tab over to my low percussion EQ and perform a low pass, effectively dividing the energy between these two tracks. Using the masking meter makes it easy to make these moves without having to flip between each track's EQ, because I can remote control the EQs thanks to interplugin communication. Here's my low percussion track after my low pass. Here's my high percussion track after my high pass. With the energy properly divided, I can apply time-based effects only to the high-end material to soften things up. I'm going to use a plate reverb from R4, a lush character reverb. I'm going to dial in a very quick decay time, around 1 second or so, bring the wet dry to 60 or so, and let's hear how that sounds before and after.
So we reach to the sky for a piece of the pie. I just wanna taste. Never be satisfied, cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep. Oh, keep floating on. Oh, keep floating.
So the percussion track is still punchy, but the highs are softened thanks to time-based effects. A lot of times what we perceive as trebly harshness occupies what we technically call the high mid-range, anything say between 2K and 6 to 8K. Sibilance can sometimes occupy this space, as can nasty resonances and crash cymbals or clangy aspects of a guitar. Taming the high mids can be problematic for EQ, as a static cut at these frequencies could result in a lifeless timbre overall. To tackle this resonance, you can use a tool like Sculptor, which uses a 32-band EQ that uses low-ratio dynamics processing to spectrally flatten harshness to conform to a darker or brighter noise profile. In fact, we have presets that automatically search for harshness. On this pad, for example, we're hearing a lot of sourness in that high-mid territory. Have a listen. So I'll call up Sculptor, and you'll notice that right away we have presets that automatically pop up. I'll go for the one that supports the problem I want to solve, which is taming harshness. Automatically we see these bands fixed to a part of the spectrum suppressing resonance, constantly adapting to the incoming audio. I'll move these bands so that we're suppressing content that's just in the high mid range, around 2 to 6.2 kilohertz. Let's have a listen to the before and after. Finally, in Ozone 8 Advanced, we have the supersized version of Sculptor called Spectral Shaper. Spectral Shaper uses a 72 Mel-spaced band EQ with low-ratio dynamics processing to spectrally flatten harshness. This tool is designed to attack harshness across an entire mix, so it's especially helpful to instantiate on the master bus and dial in some settings to taste when you hear harshness. Now, in our first tip, where we used tonal balance control to visualize energy, we noted some harshness appearing in the high mids.
Sunny days used to come around like blue moons. 1 in a million, 'cause I made it rain on monsoon. Dirty dishes in the sink, liquor on my breath.
So I'll settle the action region here. I'll use the solo function to make sure I'm over the right area. And now I can drop the threshold to begin smoothing out the harshness. I can use one of 3 ratios, light, medium, or heavy. Let's go with light.
So we reach to the sky for a piece of the pie. I just want to taste. Never be satisfied, 'cause we down for the ride until I'm put to sleep. Oh, keep floating on. Eventually fade, but I still remember the day I came to see a wonderful place. You ain't gotta ask for it, it was made here for us. Eventually.
So everything is now much softer in that region, and we're not interfering with the rhythm or punch of the track. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out our other tutorials on mixing and mastering for more tips and tricks. Take care.